Hey folks, it's Blake Butler, Executive Director of the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association. I hope everyone is doing well out there. Very pleased to bring you another interview with a new member, Becky Hobden of ECC Test Lab up in Virginia. It's formerly East Coast Canalytics, by the way, folks. Becky, welcome to our Zoom interview.
Thanks, Blake. I really appreciate this opportunity. Glad to be here, over here in Virginia, but also a big part of North Carolina. I lived there for about a decade and still have family down there, so you guys are all close to my heart.
I'm glad you said that. There's a lot of synergy between Virginia and North Carolina, a lot of agricultural rich history there. So you're seeing growers from all over the place come and use your lab there.
Yep, and a lot of the things that North Carolina is dealing with, while our legislation is somewhat different, we're all, the folks that I'm working with, the farmers and the processors, we're all working towards the same goal. So I do see a huge amount of synergy just between how the land is farmed for hemp, but also processors. There's a huge number of processors, or not a huge number, but there's a growing number of processors in both states, and both pulling from farmers from all along the East Coast, but really in these two states and in South Carolina and even West Virginia. We've seen a lot of activity of people working together throughout those states, and so that's been really good for, I think, the hemp industry on the East Coast moving forward.
Absolutely.
Collaboration,
coming together, collaboration, cooperation, as you said. So give us an idea of how you work with growers and processes, how the ECC Test Lab works with it.
Yep. So we started last year for the 2019 growing season as East Coast Canalytics. And, it was really out of what was an evident need, going through, mostly talking to people in Virginia at community meetings or coalition meetings, or at the summit in Danville. And there just wasn't a lot of testing labs out there to meet the needs of these kind of farmers that were just getting started. And so that's where we filled that need. We have an HPLC and we had a GCFID. So we kind of tested for both, depending on what the farmer was really interested in, comparing, in the state of Virginia, and I know in North Carolina some, they really use GCFID. So if people were looking to have a comparison of what might come out of a state testing lab, we were able to do that. But we were also able to do the HPLC method, which is just a more commonly used. It gives you a little bit more information. It helps split up the acid versions versus the neutral versions, which are also part of that bigger conversation about the regulation for THC or Delta-9 THC.
Right.
And so that's where we started, and we just spent a lot of time working with farmers, answering questions. I think that was, probably 50% of our time we spent running samples, and the other half of our time we really spent talking to farmers, helping them understand what it means, what the difference is. A lot of folks, you don't really see a lab report on a regular basis in your life. Where else do you really see that? Maybe from a doctor's office, but so we spent a lot of time kind of building relationships with people in Virginia, but also in North Carolina.
And Becky, I want to ask you something. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I get a lot of questions about ISO certification when it comes to labs and other facilities. Can we drill down and just kind of give me an idea? Because I'm learning myself, about this area.
So that's what, as we've grown into 2020, that's a great, thing that we've been working towards is ISO certification. At the beginning of the year, we moved into a new lab space, pulling in, not just farmers and growers, but people like processors, who the expectation there is to have a full suite of testing. So that's things like heavy metals, pesticides, mycotoxins, residual solvents. And then on top of that, there is a industry expectation, if not a state regulation, to be ISO 17025 certified. And so that's something that, we have been, especially the past probably about 2 months, have been digging into. And what that means is it gives a confidence in that lab that they have run through all of these different techniques to make sure that what they're giving you is accurate. So they do a lot of validation. Mm-hmm. You run the same test, several
times. What kind of
times.
pesticides, Becky, are you seeing up there? I'm always interested. We're finding some things as, labs in North Carolina encourage that soil testing, but I'm interested to know what kind of pesticides you're finding up there.
So we haven't, that's been a big question, which pesticides to test for. We actually use the Oregon list, which is a pretty encompassing list. It's 66 different pesticides. So I know that there's, especially in these hemp states, there's not a defined list that, ideally, your Department of Ag will look at what is being used in the industry, what has been typically been used in your state. It's a larger concerted effort to really come up with what's appropriate for your state. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I think that, we can all work to push our regulatory agencies to help us define that. But, if you look at the states that have medical marijuana or even recreational, they do have a very defined list. And so a lot of the hemp testing labs are either, pulling from one of those other states because it's already sort of set up and developed, and because it really has a larger, it kind of encompasses what is typically seen in this industry. But that's definitely something that, we can all work to
what about
develop.
Folks, Becky, that might be creating products like edibles that are, infused with full spectrum hemp oil, CBD edibles? Do you see a lot of that come back in, and you encourage that kind of testing just to be sure after that processing, be sure what you're passing on is still compliant?
Absolutely. So we see that testing, and especially in Virginia, and I would imagine that, other states will develop this type of regulation. Our Department of Ag has really defined hemp for human consumption, mm-hmm. and given some regulations around that. And I think that would include smokable hemp. So something that is going to be consumed by a person, that product needs to be tested for heavy metals, pesticides, mycotoxins, residual solvents, and then the potency as well. So, I definitely.
So it is more like a testing routine that you can, a schedule that you can offer to people. Like, if you're going to produce this, be sure you go from A to Z, just to be sure you're in compliance throughout the entire processing.
And then there's a lot of places, I think the reason processors are asking, the person selling the biomass to them is because to get that sort of testing is because they don't want to go through the process and buy something and then, at the end, put all this energy and time and money into creating a finished product. And then at the end of it, they find out that there was pesticides, further back up the line. They could have figured that out. And, there are some remediations for that. Out west, they're talking about that kind of stuff. It's probably some of the more advanced, engineering type stuff with chromatography and distillation type stuff.
And we'll be talking about it soon. It's coming, that knowledge is coming over our way, as you know, as we develop a lot of our systems and best practices going forward.
It sure is. Yep. So that's what, and actually on our website, we do have a new website that's updated with our new name, but also a lot more information. And there's a form on there that talks about when to test, at what point in your growing or in your process. So, if you're growing fresh flower, you don't really need to be testing for pesticides in the middle of your growing. That's more looking at the regulatory. And then once you've harvested and dried it, what should you be really looking at? If that plant material is going to be processed, you probably don't need to be testing for things like microbial. So that's something, because as in the processing of that, you know, a lot of that bacteria will get killed. And so, you know, but in your finished product, and that is the other thing I forgot to mention, microbial contamination is something that for human consumption will be tested for here. So,
right. Well, Becky, thank you.
But we offer like product packages for things like that. So we give a price break if you're trying to get your product full package testing done, or your biomass package, or even a smokable hemp flower package. So we kind of have some of that stuff wrapped together, and it's a little bit more affordable if you're getting the whole thing done.
I love that. I love that. And folks, you can find Becky's lab, and remember, she is the CEO, co-founder, East Coast Canalytics, now ECC Test Lab, and you can find that at ecctestlab.com. We've got a brand new website there with some forms. And thank you so much for spending some time with me. Thank you for your support of our association. Our friends in Virginia have become so important to us. As you said, you know, earlier, there's just so much we could do together. And so we really appreciate that you've come into the fold and been able to guide us in the right direction up there too. So thanks so much, Becky. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
You too. Thanks, Blake. You guys are doing great things.
Oh, thanks.
Glad to be part of it.